Hello, my name is Bernard Mordorsky, Bernie for short. I am the founder of Automotive Technical Institute in Minnesota. It's come to my attention that I need to create some videos to tell people what's going on, what we're doing, why we're doing it. The first video is about me, my background and qualifications. You can find that on Facebook or on my website on the About page. This particular video is the second one. This is about why Automotive Technical Institute. In 1974, I went into sales selling automotive diagnostic equipment for Sun Electric Corporation. In December of that year, I was asked to do an equipment demonstration for a dealership. I was in and was happy to do it. They really weren't interested in buying a piece of equipment, but they had a vehicle, a pickup truck with problems. They wanted a solution for the problems. I went in, did the demonstration. I expected the vehicle had problems. I enjoy doing demonstrations like that, looking at it. I enjoy the challenge of finding a problem. We went through our test, which is a relatively simple test. It takes about a half hour, 45 minutes. We test the systems in what's called an area test to find out what areas of the vehicle operation could have problems. We found a couple areas. I recommended we do further testing, which we call pinpoint testing, and the factory-trained dealership mechanics were totally against that. They were all up in arms. They were all adamant against me, that I had no idea what I was talking about, that none of the information that I got was valid, that anything we did would not help the situation. I loaded up my equipment. I went home. I told my wife that night, in order for me to sell diagnostic equipment, I would need to teach schools, because even the dealership mechanics did not understand how a car worked, and they were not able to find problems on a car when the car was brought in with a problem. So the independent shops and the garages weren't alone. The dealerships couldn't do it either. Interesting enough, in 1978, a few years later, I was at another dealership with another pickup truck, same dealer's kind of vehicle, same kind of truck, same engine. The customer complained about getting 6 miles to the gallon on his new pickup truck. The owner of the dealership asked me if I would take a look at the vehicle and see if there was anything we could do for it. And I told him I'd be happy to set up a time in the evening, get the mechanics in and the shop foreman. We would do a training on it. That way the mechanics and the foreman would learn how to do it, how to do what I was doing, and they would be able to find out what's wrong, and we'd be able to fix it. So we set up the appointment. When I arrived, the two mechanics were not there. They didn't have the time. They were too busy to take time out for this training session. So it was up to me and the shop foreman. We got the vehicle in, we ran our test, we found a couple problems. We found what looked like a float level too high in the carburetor, and we found the timing was not working properly in the distributor. So we were in the process of correcting that when the owner of the dealership came out and asked me if we'd found anything. I told them, I said, we did. We found a high float level, what we believe is a high float level, and we found the ignition timing is not moving properly, and we were going to correct it. He asked if that would make a difference, and I told him it may not. It's up to the customer. We'll do the repair. We'll make it put it where it belongs, make it meet factory specifications, have the customer drive it for a week or two, and then let's see what the customer says. The shop foreman, typical of a factory-trained mechanic, was adamant that we were wasting our time. He was very upset about it, quite angry about it. A couple weeks later, I went back to see the dealer, peeked around the corner, and I knocked on the door, and he invited me into his office. And he said, Bernie, you know that nothing that you did to that pickup truck? I said, yeah. He said, can you do that to all my vehicles out here? And I said, we can test them all and make sure they meet the specifications of the factory and make sure they're working properly. And I asked him, how did it go? What happened? Well, he said the owner of the pickup truck says he went from 6 miles to a gallon to 18 miles per gallon. Owner was very, very happy. That's just one instance that I've run into over the years. That was back in the 1970s. Around 1983, one of the students that had been through my schools named Mike had a customer with a brand new Buick. I believe it was a Skylark and a 4-cylinder 2.5 engine. Engine just ran really bad, just horrible, horrible. The owner of the vehicle had been dealing with Buick, and Buick, for the 2-3 months he'd had it, was unable to do anything for him. So he brought it to Mike in this independent shop. Mike had been through my schools, had run the engine performance test. He found that the PCV flow rate was not according to the limits that we had normally found for a good PCV system. Since he could not buy a new PCV valve because the vehicle was too new, he bought one for the previous year, an 82 Buick, the same make, model, the same engine. He installed it, retested it, and the PCV flow rate was right within our normal parameters, normal limits. Gave it back to the customer. Customer was really happy. Car ran like a top. He just has nothing but good to say about Mike. About 3 months later, he came to Mike with a piece of paper. It was a letter he received from Buick. Buick had found the problem on the car. And it was a recall for a PCV valve because they had defective PCV valves. Mike is not an engineer. He's not a factory-trained mechanic. He'd gone through my engine performance testing school. He knew the limits that vehicles should work in and how to test it. He did that, and he found the solution to the problem on the first car he worked on with that problem about 3 months or more before Buick found the problem. A few months ago, I had a lady come to me. She was very upset. This happened to be a Buick also. Her car was overheating. She'd been fighting it for over 4 months. The car would overheat, the engine would overheat. She'd been to automotive shops and to mechanics, did everything they said to do. She said she had spent over $450 on repairing the vehicle, replacing all the parts they told her to replace, and the vehicle still didn't work right, still overheated. I asked her, and there was another gentleman with her, and I asked him, I said, well, did you actually go and have somebody test the system to find out what was wrong with the system? And the gentleman speaks up and he says, no, that costs money. And I said, well, yeah, it does cost money, but you spent $450 on the repair and you haven't fixed the car. I finally convinced her to bring the car to me. We could take a look at it, so she brought it in. I took a look at it. And first thing, of course, we did was check trouble codes, and there were no trouble codes. Then I showed them, the lady and this man that was with her, how you diagnose a problem like this, and you check sensor readouts. Well, as we're looking at the sensors and going through the database, we find that the coolant temperature sensor is stuck at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the engine, according to the temperature gauge on the dash, was running about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. We now know why the car did not turn the cooling fans on, because the computer only saw the engine at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. We did a quick test on the wiring to make sure the wiring was good, the connector was good. She bought a $20 coolant temperature sensor, put it in the car, and she fixed the car. Now I can leave it up to you which would have been more effective and cost efficient for her to spend money that she did, spend $450, then buy a $20 coolant temp sensor and put it in for a total of $470, or to take it to somebody that knows what they're doing, spend $100 on a test, find out it's a coolant temp sensor, put it in for about 20 bucks. What's better, $120 to repair the car or $470? This is a constant thing going on. In 1983, I worked for a fleet garage. We had a vehicle come in, if I remember right, it's a Chevy Malibu with a V6 engine. It had the Rochester 2-barrel carburetor that was the front half of a quadrajet. And it came in, check engine light was on, and the code for the engine was a code 45. Engine's running rich. Fuel system is rich. As I had taught in my schools, I would normally take a readout from all the data sensors and see what that was doing. The shop foreman, my boss, said don't do that. He didn't want me to do it. He said get the shop service manual out, go down the tree, go down their troubleshooting tree, and see what you find. So I took it out, got the other mechanic with me. We both went together down there. We did it down. We followed right on down the General Motors training, the General Motors shop manual to figure out what was wrong with the car. We got down to the bottom of the page without a solution. In the bottom of the page it says, replace the computer, the ECM, with a known good computer and retest. Well, a computer is $200. Once you plug it in, it's non-returnable. So are we just going to throw $200 at the car? I went back to the shop foreman and I said, now can we run a data readout test? And he said, well, okay, go ahead and do it. So we did. And we're going through checking things like the coolant temp sensor. Is that working? Is that reading properly? We checked the throttle position sensor. And wow, okay. The throttle position sensor on a carburetor tells the computer how wide the throttle is open. The computer controls the fuel mixture of the carburetor based on the throttle position sensor reading. The throttle position sensor read wide open throttle. This is the information going back to the computer. So what does the computer do? The computer sets the carburetor controls at wide open throttle or full rich on the system, and it runs the carburetor rich. We checked the wiring out to make sure that the computer was getting the correct information and the problem wasn't the throttle position sensor. We replaced the throttle position sensor and adjusted it properly, so instead of reading 4.7, 4.8 volts, it read 0.21, 0.25, whatever the specification was. The problem was solved. The General Motors service manual on it never said anything about testing the throttle position sensor. This is normal with factory training manuals, factory service manuals. I don't know who writes them, how they determine what goes in them, but they don't cover the problems. In 1975, after my incident with the car dealership, I became certified as a vocational instructor. I started teaching adult education programs. The main focus was engine automotive diagnostics, to find the problems. You can't fix something until you know what the problem is. Back then I started off with points, followed it up with electronic ignition. We moved on later to the computer ignition systems when they came out. When the computerized carburetors came out, I added that to the program. And when fuel injection came out later on and years later, I added that to the program. As we went from points to electronic ignition, the reaction of the mechanics when we go through the course was the same thing. They would all say, you mean that's all that does? You mean it's that simple, that's all there is to it? And I would say, yep, that's electronic ignition. That's a pickup coil and ignition module. Then we went to the computer ignition systems and we'd take it all down on what each part did and how to test it. And they would say, you mean that's all there is to it? It's that simple? And I'd say, yep, that's all there is to it. Then we added the computer controlled carburetors. And the guys would say, you mean that's all there is to it? It's that simple? I'd say, yes. Then we added a fuel injection. They'd say, you mean that's all there is to it? That's all it does? Yep, that's no big deal. And the guys went out, left my classes, were able to fix a lot of cars that most mechanics couldn't fix. In 1986, I had my last teaching position as a vocational instructor. I was asked to take over at a vocational school because the instructor, who I knew at the time, was diagnosed with cancer. He was undergoing treatment. They wanted me as a substitute full-time teacher. And when he passed away, I got the position as a full-time position. When I looked into their classes of what they were teaching in engine performance, the latest information that I could see was possibly 1967. Now this is a vocational school around 1986, and what they're teaching their mechanics, the latest information is 1967. It's 20 years behind, 19 years behind. I went to the administrator at the time, showed him the information that I'd been teaching, and asked him if we could add it to the course. He thought it was wonderful and great. He said, add it to the course, so we did. I added it to the course. A few months later, he came to me and said, well, Bernie, you don't need to teach him what you're trying to teach him. He says, just teach him to get a trouble code and put on a part. And I told him at that time, I said, yes, that would be nice if it worked, but it doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is two parts. First, 90% of the cars with problems don't set trouble codes. Second, of the trouble codes that are set, 90% of the trouble codes are not the problem, they're the symptom of the problem. This means that in the first part, people will go into a shop. If the mechanic doesn't understand how a car works, he'll put a computer scan tool on it, find no trouble codes, then they'll tell him, well, we can't work on your car, we can't do anything because there's no trouble codes. Happens a lot today. The second part happens a lot today also. It's rampant and horrible. The mechanic today goes in, puts the computer on the car, he gets 3 trouble codes, he sells the customer $600, $700, $800, $900, $1,000 worth of work, puts the parts on the car, customer picks up the car, and on the way home it does exactly what it was doing when you brought it in, didn't fix a thing. That's because today's mechanics are not taught how cars work. Teaching in the 1970s, I found that the #1 problem with mechanics in the 60s and 70s, they did not understand how the cars worked, so they could not fix them. Dealing with mechanics today, I find we have exactly the same problem. Educational system, it really more handicaps the students than it does empower them. They go out thinking what they're going to do is going to work, and then on top of it, it doesn't, and they're left out here without a clue. Shop owners don't know what to do. The situation in our educational system started out over 100 years ago with the memorizing of data. Memorizing data might make you very good at a trivia game or on a TV program like Jeopardy, where they just want you to find out the data and you memorize it and you can make a few bucks. But it doesn't work in real life, because real life doesn't work that way. You've got to be able to think. One of the things we hear a lot nowadays is people need to think outside the box. When I hear that, what they're telling me is, we need you to think outside the crippled education that you have. This is the reason for Automotive Technical Institute. We need to think. We need to teach the students to be able to think. Teachers can't teach what they don't know. The teachers teaching school don't know it, so they can't teach it. If they could, they would. We need to teach application. Students need knowledge, understanding. The only way they get understanding is through application, and with application and understanding they gain wisdom on how things work. And it's not being taught. This is the purpose for Automotive Technical Institute. We're going to teach that. We teach people how to think. And that's the point. That's why Automotive Technical Institute. You can check out our website at www.autotechinst.com. If you have questions, you want more information, you can email me at info@autotechinst.com. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you for your interest in Automotive Technical Institute, and thank you for watching this video.